Brother, it's been too long since we've been able to do a podcast, and
Yeah.
I'm thankful that you're here, man. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, so this will be, you are now the number one guest we've had, but this will
Wow.
be your third appearance, and you're the most appeared guest on the show, so appreciate you.
Quite the honor.
And I will say that of all the guests that I've had, the ability to talk so candidly with you about political directions and initiatives and thoughts has been just freeing for me. So from one man to another, I want to say thank you.
Hey, thank you. I know you take the pressure off the girlfriend, the mom, dad, all the family, friends, and
I'm helping the
relationship.
relationship.
Yeah, you help across the board, no doubt. So it's a great for me to get it out, and then they can listen to my thoughts as they please, or if they want to at all.
Do you find that, before we even talk about the election,
Sure.
do you find that before this election, it was incredibly difficult to talk about politics in general? But before you answer that question, let me do one thing for your own peace of mind.
Sure.
So we're not blocking your
Yeah,
face.
you're good.
You're good. So before this election, I felt like political discourse had never been so charged, that we were so just pulled to the opposite spectrums between liberal and conservative, that every single issue was viewed in that lens, right? Like, it was never a discussion of like a parameters or within like a scale of like, you're either for abortion or not. You're either for a safe and secure border or not. You're either, voting for Hitler or you're voting for the establishment. Do you think that was the intended outcome for these parties, that they wanted to split up the populace so?
I don't know how conspiracy we get.
Fuck it,
I like
dude.
to go into
Dive
it,
in.
but I think this light switch thinking of you're either for this or you're against it is just not true, and it's not fair to people. The world is so complicated and so many layers. Out in Colorado, I'll tell you how I voted. I voted for Kennedy out there. It's a blue state, so I wasn't going to hurt Trump. I'm not going to hurt Kamala. Really, what I wanted, Ariane, and the previous times I've been on to talk about is that third federally funded party. And, if Kennedy can get 5% of the nation's vote, then in 2028 we have a third party federally funded, which that's what I wanted to vote for. And again, I didn't feel like either candidate was really great.
While I agree, and I think you and I were both on the same boat of like RFK Jr. would have had my vote as well. I think it's also safe to assume, I know it seems like a landslide, but in a lot of ways, the way Trump won this election is very similar to how Biden won 2020, where like electoral votes, it was kind of a landslide, right? Trump, I think, is like 312 or 313. He's over the 300 mile. Now, what's interesting about this election, though, is that the Democratic Party seemed to come out at a vast depression compared to 2020. I think Kamala right now, I know that not all the votes are in, but I think there's like another 2 or 3 million votes that she could possibly have. She would have a depressed turnout vote of roughly 7 to 8 million less than Joe Biden, while Donald Trump gained more votes than last time. Now, the reason I bring this up is just for, devil's advocate and argument. Let's say that RFK Jr. still was in the race. Mm-hmm. It would be safe to assume, had that been the case, had enough votes been pulled for a third-party candidate, Kamala would have won.
Probably so.
By all of the polling that I saw, RFK Jr. pulled a lot more from conservative viewpoints more than liberal, whether that's the mainstream media bias, whether that's the propaganda that was, spewed ad nauseum for the last 6 to 8 years, what have you. Do you not think it's interesting that the story ended up panning out the way it did?
I mean, it was definitely an interesting year. An election.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, it's definitely the most in tune I've been and most engaged. To me, Donald Trump, his age is also up there, one of those things that I'm just not a fan of.
It's a better chance of dying in office than living out his term.
I mean, I do think he is the better option out of the two for a handful of reasons, and we can get into that. Really, one thing specifically that has just like picked at me were two things that Biden did when he came into office in 2020. Just immediately they undid the immigration, undid the border and all that stuff.
Undid Remain in Mexico.
Right, undid that. And then the other one they did, which was never really covered, was there was this something that Trump had put together, was a coalition where to protect the whole United States from like an EMP attack. And Biden, first thing he does is eliminate that along with immigration, the stay in Mexico deal. And I'm sitting here like, why would that happen?
Within his first 36 hours in office, he enacted 127 executive orders.
Yeah. And so
which is unprecedented.
Do you remember
That's
that?
crazy.
Do you remember the Chinese balloon that was over?
Yeah.
Do you know what that was about?
When you say, do I know what that is about?
Yeah.
Like, extrapolate the question.
So, well, so when I say what it's about, do you know like why China was sending that balloon over here?
Wasn't it just surveillance?
So, what I've come to find out is that that balloon that they sent over, Russia, Iran, and China have all been they have in their military plans that if they wanted to deliver an EMP device, they would do it and detonate it over the top of the United States. So you wouldn't have actual damage done to any humans or buildings, but you would knock out the infrastructure, in which case 72 hours later, we have no refrigeration, nuclear reactors start melting down.
Terribly sorry to interrupt the content that you're enjoying right now, but if you've been watching our content for the past couple of months, you realize that Easy Talk is a brand new podcast. We're genuinely trying to figure this thing out as we're going. Some growing pains for sure. If you are genuinely enjoying this content, we feel very humble in that, but we would like to ask that you would also subscribe and like to the channel, simply because it does help us in the algorithms and ultimately to grow. So take a second. I'd really appreciate it. And on with the show.
And it was something that cost $2 billion a year, which, when you look at our budget, we just sent $100 billion to Ukraine, another, chunk of change. And really, and I guess what happens is why, I sit here and think, why would they do that? And it turns out it's for all the energy companies. They lobbied against it to repeal it. And the reason is they didn't want to take on the cost of, pumping up and protecting their infrastructure. But if they wanted to pass it on to the consumer, it was going to cost the average American citizen 20 cents a year, which I think most Americans would be okay paying an extra 20 cents a year to make sure that if we had a solar flare, which like the Carrington event happens every 100, 150 years, I think the Carrington event was a much bigger deal than we've actually been told.
Can you extrapolate the Carrington effect for those that might not know what it is? It's
yeah,
a solar
so that
flare
was the solar flare that happened like the 1850s. I don't know the exact date, but it was this worldwide event. It messed with the transatlantic cables that were under the ocean. It knocked out a lot of the grids. All like
well, it was before the Industrial Revolution, but there was still some sort of like electronics that we had throughout the U.S. and the greater population. But it was a solar flare that enacted essentially like brought down a lot of key strategic electronics that we had at the time. But we also didn't have the means in which to measure this. So like people were just like,
what is happening?
What the hell just happened?
Yeah.
Like, is this like an attack? What is going on?
Right. And so that's two of the things that Biden did that I just could not. I hate it. And there's a 12.5% chance that we have a Carrington type event solar flare every decade. There's a 12.5% chance going for the next few years. I mean, we're right up to that point. If that happened in 1847, 1850, we're right there at that 150-year mark. And so why would we not spend the 20 cents a person a year to protect ourselves from something such as that, or an EMP attack, which is something our enemies, Iran, Russia, North Korea, are all considering doing.
Here's what's crazy to me is when you have these like omnibus spending bills and our budget ballooning, there are some things that I think if you polled the U.S. populace, they would all agree on kind of funding,
totally.
Right? You have $100 billion, to your point. It's more than that, but like there was one initial push for $100 billion to go to Ukraine. $100 billion to go to Ukraine. That is such an astronomically high number, and that was just one payment that we sent over. I think the total is like around $300 billion that we've given to Ukraine during the 2.5-year conflict. I think they're coming up to 3 years now, because I think it was like in the middle of Biden's
February, March kind of kicked off
2022, right? Yeah. So we're close to 3 years. So we have $300 billion to send over to fight wars abroad for whatever strategic geopolitical chess game they're playing. Duly noted. I would still say that something as simple as like reinforcing our electrical grid to be impervious to an EMP attack, to be impervious to a solar flare, to bring up our technology, not just for security's sake, but also for like efficiency's sake and the cost benefit analysis to upgrading something over the course of a long time. One of the things that I think FDR does duly get credit for is the New Deal and like in between the states. I can't think of the word here, but the international highway system. What do they call it?
I should know what you were trying to say, but I'm totally wrong.
Interstate highway system. Thank you. I was going to say international. No, it's interstate highway system. That was such a huge cost benefit analysis, because then that was able to change the ability to freight in our country forevermore, and we're still benefiting from that almost 100 years later, right? So actually, we're close, yeah, about 100 years later. So it's like, there are things that I'm willing to spend money on if it can be seen as like an investment for true security, true protecting of our people,
infrastructure.
or the
falling apart.
efficiency of us living. But then we just seem to get bogged down with just so many earmarks, so many special interests, and they're so short-sighted.
Multi-deal part bills, everything's wedged in.
What it is it's gross capitalism. And like, so financially, I'm very conservative. Get out of my wallet and let's fund the necessities exclusively. Everything else can go kick rocks.
I've been reading a lot of Pat Buchanan. I'm totally with you.
Really? Okay. It was something that kind of just, when I was younger, I used to think that, we as a nation have a duty to bring up the lowest common denominator. Yeah. And I still, to some extent, think that. Yeah, but now I've since kind of changed that a little bit. We as a nation have a duty to bring up the lowest common denominator that wants to come up. But there are people that are content, that don't want more, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't believe that we as a nation have some sort of like obligation to these people as well. I'm sorry. If you don't want to kind of fight for yourself, why are we trying to fight for you? To caveat that though, as I've gotten older, I've noticed just inefficiencies and bloat. And that's my problem. I have no problem if, if you fundamentally change Social Security to actually put the money into the market so that you're not just sitting on a fund that's literally losing value because of inflation year over year, coupled with the fact that like you're pooling money. There's no individual that would tell you to hold on to cash. Yet that's what we do for our retirement for our senior citizens. It's literally counterintuitive, right? So like that to me is like an inefficient process. I'm not saying get rid of Social Security. What I am saying is you need to fundamentally reform how you look at Social Security. And just like any investor would tell you to put your money to work, we as a nation need to put our money to work for our retirees and subsequently you and I.
Veterans,
what have you?
Mental health. I want to help people. But
there's
we can't
money
help
to
everyone.
spend, but what are we doing?
Right.
And I think that's what this election was about. I did not vote for Donald Trump because I thought Donald Trump was like this exceptionally intelligent individual. I didn't vote for him because I thought he was like, gonna come with a chain of thought that was different from the previous administration or the previous presidency that he had. The reason I voted for Donald Trump, two-part. One, the coalition that he brought together. Totally. Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, J.D. Vance was, in my opinion, one of the best picks he could have done for vice president for two reasons. His intellect and the fact that he was a previous, antagonizer of Donald Trump. Called him Hitler before and all these other things. It proves to people like, hey, if he can pick this guy that used to badmouth him for VP, come on, how big is the ego really?
Sure. Well, I think it's so big.
Of course. I mean, you have to have it to be president.
Right.
Who's going to be like a meek president?
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've had some robots. No, yeah. I think that's honestly what happened to Kamala. She just could not connect with people. To me, she just felt very cardboard cutout. And I'm not saying she's a bad person. I bet if Kamala wasn't involved in my politics, I bet she'd be fun to hang out with. But I did not want her, and not necessarily her, but the people around her. Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken. I just finished Bob Woodward's book called War, and a little bit left-leaning book, but very interesting. And what I picked up from it a lot is the beginning of every chapter is just kind of funny. It's Tony Blinken or Jake Sullivan or John Feiner suggests this. Biden says no. By the end of the chapter, Biden says yes. And you're like, so it's clear who's been running our foreign policy, and it's just clearly not been the president of the United States. And to me, Donald Trump isn't perfect. I didn't vote for him, but I understand why you would vote for Kamala. I understand why you would vote for Trump. And to me, it just seems the American people decided that pretty overwhelmingly that they were tired of the last 4 years. I think Kamala really messed up when she was on The View when they asked, what would you change over the last 4 years? And she said, not a thing. I mean, not one thing.
There were a couple of blunders.
Yeah, and so she kind of shot herself in the foot on this campaign.
Would you agree, though, that I think there was a fundamental... Because, if you were talking about, what these presidents or what these candidates were running on, they didn't really have, a clear message on policy. Sure. Neither candidate. Trump wasn't going out there talking about, there were some things about, no tax on tips and tariffs, but, no concrete foundation of like, here's my comprehensive plan. You can go to xyandz.com and look into it. And by the way, Kamala didn't really have anything that she was running on either.
Not until like days before the election.
Yeah, a lot of the things that she was spouting out.
And she didn't run on what she ran on in 2020, you know, or
well, they
the lead up
sound
there.
good, but it's also in context of a $36 trillion deficit. So like, you know, we want to give first-time home buyers this, and we want to not tax on this. Like, I'm all for these things. I do want to help the first-time home buyer, and I don't want people to be taxed on tips. Yeah. But at what point are we as a country going to sit back and be like, all right, are we going to get this budget under control? And then how much are we going to have to tax on top of now to service the debt and handle our pre-existing obligations? But I want to take a step back, and you were talking about like, you could understand why someone would vote for Kamala and someone would vote for Trump. And I agree with you, but I think the fundamental difference was optimism.
Yeah.
When I looked at the Harris campaign, it was one of like fear and dread. Yeah. It was like, that is Hitler. He's going to, you know, your daughters will die on an operating table because they can't get an abortion. Your minorities will be incarcerated in mass. Like all these things that were just like very obtuse. But then you look on the Trump side, and granted, he had some negative moments too, where he's just kind of like throwing accusations and attacking. But the one thing I did get from that campaign was optimism. We're gonna do this. We're gonna make America great again. We're gonna build back. We're gonna put this person in a government efficiency program. We're gonna put Tulsi Gabbard as Veterans Affairs. We're gonna bring Vivek in. I think just when I looked at like who was on the ballot, to me it was Kamala, Walz, the establishment.
Yeah, if
more of the same.
A vote for Kamala, to me, in my mind, was a vote for the military-industrial complex. You know, and to continue all wars everywhere, all the time. I'm not saying, you know, Trump's not perfect. Again, he is all in with Israel, and dude, that's that book War, you know, by Bob Woodward. He talks about the relationship with Biden and Bibi Netanyahu. I mean, he was under investigation up until January 6th for fraud and bribery, and you know, January 6th, October 7th. Sorry. Election season.
Freudian slip.
Yeah, October 7th happened, and you know, they've rallied around him, and so yeah, it's interesting over there. And obviously, like, you know, I support Israel to be there, but I don't support what they've been doing. You know, some of the things some of these videos you see are just from the IDF. It's like I have so many Jewish friends I love and care for, and it's just somehow through the Israel lobby, you know, we send them $4 billion a year, and I'm not saying we should not send them money to protect themselves because they're an ally, and there is I think, advantage to us, you know, being tied to them. But at the same time, maybe like next year, instead of being $4 billion, could we do 3.5? Because we have some issues here in the U.S. we need to fix. Maybe the next year we'll do 3, 2.5. You know, you guys, we've been giving you this money for a long time, and they have, you know, a country that has, I think, the capability to stand on its own 2 feet. And again, some of these countries I don't want to not help, but we've got to fix some stuff here at home right now, or we're not going to be able to help anybody in the future.
Do you think we should take an isolationist form for the next 2 years? Do you think that America should stand as not the policemen, but the peace negotiators of the world? What do you think America's place is internationally?
Man, I picked up Pat Buchanan's book, A Republic, Not a Democracy, and I've never had a political book that I've just absorbed and wanted to. It just hit everything I thought. And it's funny, he talks about the term isolationist and the first time that showed up, and how, you know, looking at every war we've been in, especially since, to me, well, the war is a taxation on the people of the United States or whatever country is waging that war. And because we're sending money overseas, and then we have to raise taxes to pay for that war. If you ask the American people very straightforward, hey, we're going to support this war, but your taxes are going to go up 10%, what do you think the American people would say?
It depends on the war.
Depends on the war. Totally. And I think, I want to arm ourselves to the teeth here at home, and I want to be able to go help when we can help, and when we're asked for help. But right now, we just have too many things going on here, and we can't be the police right now for the whole world. You know, I think we can let Europe, NATO do its thing, let them continue on with their deal. I don't like what we do with NATO, and we keep expanding it. I think that's a mistake. I think we just keep trying to provoke Russia, and I think the Biden administration especially did so through the reactions with Tony Blinken. You know, Boris Johnson, they sent over there to shut down all the peace talks
negotiations.
In April 2022. I mean, that war could have been over in 2 months.
Did it ever? You know what really surprised me the most about Biden's presidency? At how much conflict can arise in such a short amount of time. During Trump's presidency, there was a lot of heated rhetoric with like North Korea, with, you know, members of ISIS and all these other things. But when you really look at it, don't ask about Yemen. That was a
again,
blood.
Trump's not perfect. He messed
Trump's
up,
not perfect.
and that ultimately led to Brexit and caused other issues. You know?
Yeah, but I would
In some
also
degree.
I would also say that Brexit was like they were naturally progressing towards Brexit.
Sure.
Like I think Trump added fuel to a fire that was already existing.
That's a good way to put it.
But that was going to burn regardless. We just kind of like helped it burn faster and get to charcoal faster, kind of thing. But one of the things that I think resonated more true than ever is that peace through strength. And I kind of go back and forth on this because there's a part of me that's like, we have so many issues internally that we have to fundamentally tackle. Yeah. Simultaneously, though, just like in everything other aspect of life, we're not competing with just ourselves. Yeah. And when you have China brokering peace deals in the Middle East, when you have China investing billions upon billions of dollars in natural resource rich countries in Africa, they're trying to play the long game. Now, I have an optimism in me regarding this like geopolitical hegemony of the world, and that is they are doomed to fail because their systems are not one of success. Communism, socialism, oligarchy, aristocracy, these are the norms of humanity. A republic, a democratic republic like we have, is the enigma, is the outlier. And we've never been more prosperous as a species than in America. So, like, the proof is kind of in the pudding. In a lot of ways, we can shit the bed for 10 years and we're still the juggernaut of the world. We can have a $36 trillion deficit and our dollar is still not worthless. So, like, we succeed in spite of our stupidity, not because of it, right? So, in a lot of ways, I always resort to this. It's like the supreme intelligence and I would say divine ordain of the founding fathers. They were flawed men just like the rest of us. But, you know, when you take into consideration how young they were for the time, what risks they were willing to take, they were far greater men than I.
I mean, it was liberty or death, and we've come very far from that.
They were traitors. If they would have lost, they would have all been hung and lost all their property.
Families, yeah.
It would have been a fundamentally different world.
Totally.
If you don't mind, because we kind of went through a couple rabbit holes, and I want to discuss Israel. I want to discuss all these things, but I kind of want to go back to the election. What are you thinking election night? Are you watching it closely? Are you?
You know, I'd made the comment in the Facebook post back in August that I really thought the DNC were just constantly and perpetually shooting themselves in the feet this whole election. So I called it back in August that I thought Trump would win, and it's very interesting. I'm in the middle.
Was that before? Forgive me. In August, was that before or after the first assassination attempt?
That would be after, because that was in July. Right?
That assassination attempt, I thought to myself, if this guy loses. That's insane.
I
thought he had it in the bag. I texted you and I was like, that's the election.
You did.
That's the election.
You did. We're talking about a weird thing. Then they just cremated that kid's body, no questions, you know, like
Less than 10 days. They did a professional cleaning of the house.
It's crazy.
The father was seen grocery shopping at Costco or Sam's Club or some grocery store with a gentleman hoodied up, gloves on. This has been like widely like known, like it's on every podcast and all that stuff. One of the things that I like about a Trump presidency is I'm genuinely hoping for transparency.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things are not transparent because of, you know, national security, and we have all of these documents that are classified, and I think if they created, I'm sure if you asked Americans like, hey, we're going to spend $100 million on a group of people that are going to go through each classified document and decide which ones should be brought open to the public, the Epstein client list, the logs, the videos of that night where he committed suicide. I'd like to see that because that was apparently recorded.
Oh, I thought there was no video. I thought they were turned off. Someone has the tape. Who knows?
It's a VIP, you know what I mean? That suicided out of nowhere. God bless.
Yeah. Diddy's not going to make it to May, I don't think either.
Actually, I think he is.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, because the difference is the clients. Diddy is Hollywood and rappers and artists and all this other stuff. Epstein was politics. Epstein was leaders. Epstein was, you know, the juggernauts of the capitalist world. These are the people that, like, I don't want to say run the world, because I think if there's anything that this election has shown us is that the power is still with the people and that the system works.
For now.
Yeah, that was my big thing when people were talking about, like, well, how do we know Trump's not going to, you know, if Trump gets elected, he's going to stay in office. I go, he's 82.
Yeah.
He's 82. Yeah. He has a better chance of dying of old age this next term. there's a better chance of JD Vance becoming the next president than us having like an election before that with Trump ending his term.
Right.
So for the record, and then second, he already tried to not leave, and I'll concede that point. He tried to get fake electors and all these other things. Trump is not a perfect guy, and by all means, I think he should be reprimanded for these things. However, the system works because even when you had a president who didn't want to leave office, he had to leave office.
So you say the system works. I have had this thought and fear that what if the masses have been bamboozled? You know, Trump is sitting down with Peter Thiel, Eric Schmidt. That's where J.D. Vance came from. He came from Silicon Valley. He worked with Eric Schmidt. So, and you look into things like Palantir and Andrew Will, some of these different companies, and they're very, I don't know, interesting. And
But do you believe that people can change over the course of time and people can make mistakes?
Well, obviously, yeah. I mean, J.D. Vance, there's an example, right? He was calling Trump Hitler, and that's the other thing I love is know how
that's on tape.
Kamala, every left-wing pundit called Trump Hitler a fascist, and then now that he won, they're like, and now we're going to hand off the democracy and a peaceful transfer of power to Hitler. So was he Hitler, or is that's where I get frustrated. It's like it really is a call wolf, boy cry wolf situation.
Here's what I will say: in the annals of like U.S. history, this was actually not the worst insult-driven election.
Yeah.
The worst by far, hands down, and you guys can look at this yourself, was actually Thomas Jefferson versus John Adams. I mean, there were articles directed by Thomas Jefferson that journalists wrote that was calling John Adams like a transvestite back in 200 years ago. Yeah. So it's like it's a different time, right?
Go back to your point on the isolationist deal. Like, I mean, that's John Quincy Adams. That's his quote. Don't go searching for monsters abroad, right? Sorry to come back to that. I mean, that was my whole deal. Is I don't want to go searching for.
Yes,
wars.
and while I agree with the notion at the time, because you have to also think like where were these guys?
Because isolationist is a propaganda word that popped up.
Fair. And I still think it is a propaganda word because it's like a term that can mean many things to many people. It has a negative
connotation to it.
Yes,
like, you don't want to do anything. Yeah,
or positive depending on who you're talking to.
Of course.
And that's why I think like long form discussions are going to be the norm going forward because you cannot in today's political climate with how much nuance and complexity is like abortion, yes or no? Well, that's not a yes or no question. Border, yes or no? I actually think that's a yes or no question, but some people might not think it's a yes or no question. You know what I mean? Do we support this war? Depends on the war. Like, what are we fighting for? Who are we fighting? Is there an end goal? Is this going to be another quagmire? I'm telling you, Ukraine is our Iraq, Afghanistan 2.0.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that the Democrats they can't seem to figure out where the disconnect was. And if you look at the way Colorado voted, it was really interesting. There was a lot of red in Colorado, but I even tell myself I voted for yes on 79. I think it's 3 here, and I think they're
What
different.
is 79?
79 was the abortion one out there for women's rights. And
Amendment 3 in Missouri passed. It was our abortion rights.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened in Colorado too. I think they got it where they're going to take it, go back to the federal. Yeah, I think they're going to take it back to the federal level.
Missouri,
what their
abortion gets passed, but Trump is elected.
Right. So see, that tells me there's a major disconnect between the Democratic Party. Is that a lot of people are, we'll support women's rights. I support women's rights to choose. It's not whatever they do is between them and their God, and that's their soul. Like, to me, that's not my business.
Can I say that also is like the system working? That Roe versus Wade was overturned, and by the way, I had to explain to a liberal friend of mine.
I still don't like that they did it.
Why?
To me, it was settled, and it was something that it just causes so much anger.
It was notoriously known as bad case law.
Well, for 50 years, I know the GOP is. I mean, that's the deal. I think a lot of this anger by the Democrats is misdirected. They need to be mad at their own party. They had the chance to codify Roe versus Wade, and they didn't. The Democrats sat around and they ran on fear and this. And
do you think they did it? Do you think they did it specifically to use it as a political cudgel later on?
Absolutely.
Because I ask all my liberal friends, if you take Trump out of the equation. And let's say that there's because by the next 4 years, especially with another midterms, there's a very high likelihood that first of all, abortion is legal in all 50 states in the U.S. There is no state that has abolished abortion. You can even get an abortion in Texas up to 6 weeks. Now, 6 weeks is real close. You might not even know you're pregnant for 4 weeks.
And that's the stuff I'm like, guys, come on, what are we doing?
But here's the thing I'm going to say, though. Is it not the system working when you allow the states? I think that the government that governs best is the government that governs least federally.
Okay.
And that the more you go closer to the individual, no one knows how to govern themselves better than themselves. But you can't just take my rules and extend them to you. That's not how this works, right? So you need some sort of level that we all kind of agree upon. And I personally think localism is the way. So if if isolationist is the localism internationally, localism is you in Colorado do you boo-boo.
For sure.
And me in Missouri will do me.
That's right.
And if at any moment I don't like how my state is being run, I can vote with my feet and move elsewhere.
Sure.
And we saw that this election because holy shit, to win both Texas and Florida by 14 points and also gain ground in California and New York. Now, granted, California and New York heavily blue.
Yeah.
Still lost by a huge margin. But to gain ground in these states shows the shifting winds, slowly yet surely. I will also say, and I'm curious to see what you think about this, and I said this off air, but I'll say it on, this Republican Party is not conservative. Trump's Republican coalition kind of hijacked the party. And I think the party's going to try to use it to kind of, get more House seats, Senate seats, and it's working. But I'm very curious to see what happens to this party after Trump is gone. Because if you do have I have faith in the fact that Tulsi Gabbard shifted and RFK Jr. seems to be getting involved in the administration. You have
Tulsi's
guys
gonna run.
Dude, well, my thing is, what does the Republican Party look like post-Trump? And what does the Democratic Party look like 2 years, 4 years from now? I think the Democratic Party shifts slightly to the right to become a little bit more central. The Overton window moves over because it's shifted to the left very hard. But I also think what's going to happen is that the right is going to move slightly to the center as well. They're not going to move more right. It's proven that it's not going to work. You lost gay marriage. You lost the war on weed and narcotics. The war on drugs is a failing battle. You're going to have to come to this conclusion at some point in time. You've also lost the war on abortion. These three things were the conservative bedrock. Gays can't get married, the war on drugs, and abortion, pro-life. You're losing that on all three counts. The American people have spoken. What do you do as a Republican Party? Are you in 2 years? I was talking with some friends. They're like, what do you think Trump is going to do in the first 2 years? I go, if he's smart, he's going to close up the border and he's going to do peace in the Middle East and in Ukraine. If he's smart. Stay away from anything controversial. Don't even touch abortion. Don't touch anything. Just secure the border, deport criminal illegals. Also, because you have the House and Senate, now is the time to reform immigration.
Sure. I mean, that's what same as happened last time when he got in. He had that stint. That's when they got all the legislation through.
Yeah, but they got the legislation passed on taxes, man.
Yeah.
That just, the optics of that is listen, I love it. I love having more of my money. Thank you for giving me more of my money. However, to the average populace, to the average individual, they're going to look at that and be like, oh, he's going to, he gave this so-and-so a tax cut when they don't realize that they got the one-child tax the one-child tax credit from Donald Trump and not Joe Biden. It actually elapsed over Joe Biden. So to bring it back to the thought of I don't think that this conservative party, this Republican Party is like my father's Republican Party. I think this is a new thing.
No, we're morphing into something different right now. I think it's, you said the Whig Party and all these other different parties, all throughout history. And I think it is changing. I think we are in the midst of a turnover. I mean, when you have RFK, Tulsi Gabbard jumping, Tulsi was one of the lead DNC people for many years.
She was the one who buried Kamala in the primaries in 2020.
Yeah, she did. And, if she made the jump and some of these people are considering the other option, I just, to me, I really try to listen to everybody, literally everyone from Rachel Maddow to Tucker Carlson. I go the full spectrum because you have your chessboard here. I was thinking about it today. I was like, I feel like I live on an 8-player chessboard and I'm a pawn in the middle of it. And I'm constantly trying to listen to, what are you trying to pull me towards? What are you trying to pull me towards? Where are you trying to move me? And then how does that affect, what really happens? I'm not totally sure that Trump, he's not part of the super ultra deep state, and that what if the whole thing could have been a show that now we've got him in, now we can push that CBDC, right? We get those,
I'll tell you
those
why.
digital currencies.
I'll tell you why. The
it's something
assassination
to ask and
attempt. No, the assassination attempt. That's what did it for me.
You don't think that could have gassed it up?
No, because I shoot regularly, and I'm telling you right now,
I'm not saying that first one was fake, but I mean the guy died, which was terrible.
Yeah, no, not even that. I'm just saying to try to if let's just say you're 4D chessing this, and your master plan is let's get as close as we can to blowing his brains out on national television, but not.
See, I think that could be a different. I think that might be a separate situation.
There's one gentleman that did die, and there's another gentleman that was critically wounded, but thank God survived. Yeah. So it's no, that could have easily been Trump.
Oh man,
and isn't that crazy how we could be we could be sitting here today having a completely different conversation. We are millimeters away from a completely different conversation.
as someone who's done I was reading on JFK assassination and RFK assassination. It is interesting that all these things are happening right now.
When one thing happens, it's like an extravagant event. When you have two pieces, now you have a trend. And I'm just saying that we have this notion that like, when Putin blew up the airplane of the
Prigozhin or whatever.
Yes, Prigozhin, the military contractor in general of like basically almost a somewhat weird coup.
Yeah.
Blew up that airplane. No one said a word, but everyone knew.
Everybody knew.
And it's like, do you think that the United States of America, who has overthrown governments in the past,
over 80,
would not be so bold as to assassinate its own leader and get in a proxy? Which, if you look at U.S. history, Gerald R. Ford was a very establishment friendly president and had never won. By the way, his vice presidency, he never even ran for vice president. They were basically pushing JFK to appoint him as vice president because the establishment wanted to support of Gerald R. Ford. So it's like you picked a VP that he didn't even want.
Ford's also interesting because he's the one that his initials or signature is by the JFK autopsy. He's the one that moved the shot in the back to line up as a throat shot.
I didn't know that.
Ford's part of that JFK. He knows. Knew. Yeah.
Isn't it crazy that they won't? The reason that Trump said that he would not make those papers public was because Mike Pompeo said.
I'm so glad that guy's not involved.
Dude, isn't that crazy?
Makes me happy. I need these neocons out of here. I'm tired.
Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo were both chosen to not be in the administration, which is in the right trajectory. Yeah. However,
not out of the woods yet.
His chief of staff, I don't think people understand how entrenched that woman is.
Mm-hmm.
So he's getting a lot of brownie points right now for appointing the first chief of staff that's a female in the West Wing, right? Yet this woman is entrenched in special bureaucracy and special interests, and I'm wondering what the ploy is there. I'm leery as well. Like,
are they really going to let Kennedy
let me put it this way.
involved?
Whenever the mainstream media starts giving Trump credit, I start doing a double take. Like, why would you be doing that? Did he pick someone that he shouldn't have picked? Like, seriously, that's what I think.
Someone they approve of.
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? Is like that job is so difficult because what you're essentially doing is you're electing someone to then create a business, and that business is to appoint. Here's my CTO, here's my CRO, here's my CIO. You have to appoint all these positions for a 4-year business, quote unquote, a term, right? How do you know who's qualified for these things? Sometimes I think that you just need to get the most intelligent people in those positions and not necessarily the most experienced, because I've said this before on both podcast appearances. Jared Kushner, who had zero experience as any sort of diplomatic of any kind, was the Secretary of State and came the closest to peace in the Middle East through the Abraham Accords that I've ever seen in my lifetime. All I've thought about in the Middle East was war, death, quagmire of financial.
It was a payoff. It was, hey, you take this money and keep your people calm, and you take this money and take your people calm. But to me, that can be considered money at least decently spent.
Dude,
because it stops death.
But here's the other thing too: is like, how long do you have to do that before they forget why they hated each other? Like, how long? If I have to pay for peace,
at least 2 or 3
generations,
a
generation of no murders, a generation of no siblings or parents or sons and daughters that hate the other for taking life. A generation. I'll pay for peace. Because we've been paying for the last 30 years for war, and where's that sent us?
Buddy, I'm with you on that. I'm so tired of the endless war. Afghanistan all this money we just keep sending. It just doesn't seem to be. It just creates more terrorism to me. Every bomb we drop creates is terrorism seeds. That's all it is. You drop a cluster bomb, those are cluster seeds for terrorism. You know.
What do you say then to the people that say, like, October 6th happens and there needs to be a retaliation?
So you did it to your October 7th.
Sorry, October 6th. January 6th. October 7th, thank you.
I'm with you.
Jesus, forgive me.
I got you. You're good.
Jews. October 7th happens. Yeah. When 9/11 happened, the United States was so uniformly galvanized and patriotic and was ready to fight any enemy.
Oh, I remember someone saying in one of my classes when 9/11 there's going to be a country missing after this. And basically, that's what happened.
Yeah, literally. We overthrew 2 of them. But anyway, October 7th happens. And, obviously, we could talk about the nuances and discuss the various approaches of the retaliation.
Yeah.
But one of the things I think about is I, I, I truly don't think there's a right way to fight that makes everybody happy. Now, do I think that you should be bombing women and children? No.
They say 70% of this. I heard the stat today that 70% of the deaths are women and children over there.
That doesn't shock me. When you're indiscriminately bombing like these,
I mean, more bombs that have been dropped on like Dresden in World War II. In a much smaller area.
Have you seen some of the politicians that have talked about like how that's good because we're essentially like depleting our old stockpile?
I can't.
Dude, Lindsey Graham
I can't handle
might
that.
be a reptile. Like
it
when
would
I
not
look at
shock
this
me.
guy and the way he talks about war and death, he's worse than Nikki Haley. He's talking about like he was on talking about the Ukraine war with Russia, talking about like, well, we can't let Putin get all these precious minerals in the Ukraine.
Well, that's what it's about. It's about the $11 trillion in minerals.
And when you ask him about like Israel and like the war with Hamas and everything, he was like him and Chuck Schumer. So it's a don't think that Republicans are the only bad ones. Chuck Schumer's a lizard person too. They both were all like, well, what we're giving them is our old equipment, and that gives us opportunity to sell it at a discount and then use that to buy new equipment. I'm like, what
What was that?
did you just say the quiet part out loud? So like what you want to do is you want them to go out and bomb poor brown people that live in the sand in some fucking country that they're being used as human shields by a terrorist group who's actively trying to be militant against a superior superpower. You want them to get bombed, deplete armaments so that you can build more armaments to what? Sell those so that they can continue this?
And then when
Do
they
you
go,
not
what
understand?
happens?
Dude, it's so insane to me, and dare I say, inhuman. It's
I
inhuman.
despise it. That's what the JFK assassination taught me. Everything I've read about is I despise the military-industrial complex, and I understand it drives business and technology and all that, but there are other things we could do. JFK. That's actually one of the errors I think he made. One of his final actions he signed before he went to Dallas was he's the one that I'm trying to remember exactly how it was, but he signed the deal where all the mental hospitals in the country would be. I can't remember if they like lowered the funding on it or something like that, but then they ultimately failed under Reagan, and that's when Reagan released everybody into the streets, and now we have this crazy mental health crisis. Why can't these companies that are military industrial complex, why can't they become like the mental health industrial complex? Can we not help all of our veterans, all of our homeless people? Can they not direct this money in different ways of how to help them? Why does everything have to be about ending life and not preserving and helping life?
Can I say something that's going to kind of go against the grain of like me
Sure.
as like I'm a financially conservative guy. I think the reason is because there's no money in solving a problem. There's
probably
only
true.
money in prolonging it. Like our problem with like healthcare and our problem with like the over litigation of America is, let's say you start funding this, looking into the mental health of America. Well, then let's say that funding is used appropriately and we give people the right care and over the course of, let's say, 20,
Because are they not
30
curling
years.
a drain on society right now with some
Yeah,
of
but a
these
drain
issues?
for what? Because we're giving everybody opioids out the ass, and we're overprescribing Americans, and they're dying at record numbers from fentanyl overdose
And
from drugs.
they're going to ERs. We have to use those supplies on those people.
My problem with America is the hypocrisy of it. You can't have it both ways. You
tough.
cannot say that you are the arbiter of freedom and justice and truth and the American way when you're also the arbiter of death and destruction and capitalizing on the destruction of individual humans, whether they're in our country or out.
Yeah, and so actually, that you remind me. RFK gave one of my favorite speeches. He gave about a year ago. It was in New Hampshire, and it kind of coincides with JFK's peace speech. And in it, he talks about like who do we want to be as Americans? Do we want to be known as a country of violence? Because that's what we've become. We spread violence abroad, and now we think that's okay, and we've become these violent people here. And is that what to us? You talked about China being a leader for peace and brokering deals. I think that if we could show the world that we want to do that again,
They're filling a void that the U.S.
Of course. I
By
want to step
no
back to that
means is
void.
China any better.
No, I want to step back into that void in a genuine way to help the world as opposed to just blowing everything up. I'm tired of spending the money on bombs and bullets and death. I'm just over it.
You made the comment earlier about like how if we would have galvanized and kind of respected and I don't want to say the word admired, but if we respected and moved closer to peace relations and a good correspondence with Russia, that it would essentially kind of close off China as being if there are two hemispheres to the world, we are the West, China's the East.
Sure.
It would behoove us to anger a world superpower with nuclear weapons and, by the way, the main exporter of energy to China.
Do you know what's in Russia's doctrine, their military doctrine, that if they have a humiliating loss, that gives them the green light to use a nuclear device?
Yeah, but
Obviously that issues a response, but I'm just saying, like, you can't humiliate a nuclear superpower. You have to be able to come to terms. I mean, that's the whole Khrushchev, Kennedy, 26 letters that they wrote back and forth to each other. They had a hotline insult. Communication is the key to stopping death and war in the world. They were both surrounded by these war hawks and really chicken hawks. A lot of people have never been in a fight. But they promote the death of other people because they don't understand what consequence is.
Do you think they don't understand it, or do you think they just don't value it? I think there's no way
Probably
ignorance. I don't think there's any way you can be ignorant in
All they
today's
value
day
is
and
money.
age.
They value their pocketbook and their stocks. And
To
then
what
once they
end?
go-
Because you can't eat money. And if there was some sort of nuclear conflict, good luck. You know what I told my wife? Because my wife is not super politically savvy, and she voted for Biden in 2020. I voted for Trump in 2020, and let's just say I never once told my wife what to do. I never once told my wife what to think.
I never told my girlfriend how to vote. I go, you just do it.
I only ask questions.
Yeah.
She'll ask me things like, why is this way? Well, you voted for Biden, and Biden appointed this person in this cabinet position who then made this ordinance that then resulted in this. And then I would ask questions like, when you voted for Biden, like, why did you vote for Biden? Like, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And I never tell her anything. I always say, like, why did you do what you did?
Sure.
And it always devolves to, you know what she did one day before the election? She was looking at her ballot that came in the mail, and she's like, where are you voting on this? Where are you voting on that? And I go, baby, I love you. But if you're going to ask me the day before the election where I sit on certain topics, I don't want to tell you how to vote.
Sure.
I would rather you go into that voting booth and not vote on things that you don't know about.
That's fair.
Because if you don't have a position on something, don't vote on it. Yeah. But what I don't want to do is you ask me and now you're just doing what I tell you, because then you're not thinking for yourself.
Totally.
So we sat for an hour and we went over everything on that ballot from this is where I'm voting. This is why. Why would you think that? It was honestly, it brought our marriage closer. Not because she saw eye to eye with me on a lot of things, because we didn't agree on everything on the ballot. Yeah. But it was more like, I want you to be your own person. I want you to vote your own way. I want you to come to your own conclusions. And I love you regardless. You're the mother of my children. You're my wife.
About my girlfriend, I never at any point, she's been around me. She knows who I obviously lean towards. Obviously talk about it all the time, but. I didn't ask. I just let her do it, and she volunteered the information, and that was fine. But pleased either way. However she voted, I want everyone to use their voice as they see fit. And again, I can see why you voted for Kamala. I understand. I get the fear that you've experienced through Trump and this propaganda of Project 2025, which they've completely dismantled. That Trump has nothing to do with it, from what I can understand. But I understand the fear.
That's the 4D chess. I think that's I know it's the Heritage Foundation, but I want to dig into that funding.
Sure.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was some people from across the aisle.
And to me, that whole deal, it's a bunch of stupid ideas, and the reason that it's not going anywhere is because most people don't agree with what is written in that document. And
that's why I think it's from across the aisle. Because if your goal is true, direction for the prosperity of mankind, you don't need a project. You don't need a doctrine for it. Yeah. It's like self-evident. Yeah. More freedom for people. That includes abortion. That includes don't make me take a jab if I don't want to. More
my body, my choice, right?
My body, my choice.
And that's how I feel about it all. Again, I voted for women's rights in Colorado. Do what you ladies want, and I'm going to do what I want. And
I got a lot of blowback from conservatives on that one, because they were like, Ariane, how could you vote for this? And I go, listen, I remember what it was like when everyone around me was telling me to take the shot. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I never took a single vaccine. Not caveat. I got the vaccines when I came over to the country. Not my choice, but it was also I think 13.
You're talking about the COVID ones.
Yeah, I'm talking about the COVID vaccines. I never got a single vaccine.
Or the CVs, maybe we
said. My wife got the vaccine.
COVID
I never got the vaccine. Luckily for me, I had an employer with balls, okay? But what I'm trying to say is I remember what that felt like. And that was just a shot that I didn't want to take. Mm-hmm. That was not something growing inside of me that will result in life and that tough decision and all these other things. And I said it before with Kyle Keeley, and I'll say it with you. The issue of abortion has already been solved. Ron Paul has already solved it. Abortion should not be illegal. It should be unthinkable. Work on the morality of man and you'll solve the problem. But you can't legislate morality.
No.
You can't. We have agreed upon things of supreme morality. Murder's bad because you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The very first one is life. And if you murder, you're taking that liberty away from somebody, right? Duly noted. But I shouldn't have to legislate eating healthy. I shouldn't have to legislate going to bed on time and getting 8 hours of sleep. At what point are we a nanny state? At what point are we just like Big Brother?
Legislate recess for everybody every day. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane.
I mean, I don't know. We've just become this unhealthy, angry country, and I just need to see some energy going the other way. And I think that's what I to your point,
Do you
I
feel
did see
that
with
now?
I've maybe I guess we'll see. I'm cautiously hopeful. Very emphasis on the cautious because again, I don't like that Peter Till's around. I don't like his.
What would you
chief
need
of
to
staff.
see? Like, what would be some things in the right direction to make you go, like, okay?
I mean, obviously, we need to shut down the war in Ukraine. In my opinion, to
But
me,
when you say shut down, do you mean like stop funding it? Do you mean broker
I mean, we need
peace
brokerage,
negotiations?
peace negotiations. I mean, at this point, Crimea, I think, is lost. Sevastopol,
Donbass and the Donetsk
Donbass
are gone.
Yeah, I think at this point, those people view themselves as ethnic Russians.
They've chosen. The people have chosen.
I'll tell you what. Anyone that's really interested in the Ukraine conflict, John Mearsheimer 10 years ago gave a speech. He's a professor at University of Chicago. I've watched the.
He was also on the All In podcast for their. That was a great.
Yeah, and he's also the one that wrote the book.
By the way, if I may, the All In podcast is, in my opinion, top tier. Top 3 podcasts I listen to.
He's a very sharp man, and again, I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but he's just. He lays it out. I mean, he breaks it down to like the dialects, the language, what happened on every day. I mean, it's a slide deck presentation. It's 10 years old, so I don't feel like it's been edited with propaganda or with misleading information. And it's just he goes through the demographics of why it's very different and what happened and who started bombing who and how the Russians stepped out. They actually had a contract with Ukraine to be in Crimea and have that port because that was the only warm water port. But then once all the shelling and all the interaction started happening, Russia broke that agreement. And I don't agree with what Russia's done. What they've done is horrible and horrendous. I mean, they're dropping all these bombs and killing all these people. But again, we have some fault.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
We do it through proxies. They do it like directly. Are we any better? I make this argument with people saying like,
I think it's worse to use other people's kids.
Agreed. And here's the other thing I'll say. You live in a world of reality.
You talk about going to do the fight. Yeah, I'm happy to go do the fight when it makes sense. But to me, this doesn't make sense.
At the end of the day, they're a nuclear superpower.
Yeah.
We have to share this world with them, or mutually assured destruction will happen. Do they have a different form of government? Do they have different leaders? Of course, all these things. But like the angle cannot be confrontation.
No,
It
communication.
must be diplomacy.
Yeah.
It has to be. There's no other option. There's no other option. And let's talk
We're
about
on an arc, man.
talk about the fuckery that we did in Ukraine. We did a coup there as well because there was a duly elected official that we said, no, we're good. We want Zelensky.
Well, they had elected some guy who was just really a little bit more Russian leaning. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
Unimportant because he lost in the annals of history.
yeah. So he's in there, and
Technically Zelensky won, but what happened was it was like a special election after the fact because he was running on the Minsk Accords, which were directly related to like
ending the war and
ending
peace
the
accords.
Yes, the Minsk Accords were essentially saying that like we would accept almost like a neutrality similar to like Switzerland.
Yeah.
And just basically saying like we will be the buffer between you, Russia, and NATO.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what I've started to discover is that we've just set up all these tripwires for Russia all over the place, and every time if you touch a NATO country, here we come, and all we've done is spread NATO around, and it wasn't just James Baker that gave the promise in the '90s that we won't expand Russia. It was the UK and other European.
It was every other country in the UN.
Now, granted, it wasn't ever written down, but it was one of those deals, And when we started brokering the Minsk Accords in April 2022. Putin, on good faith, started pulling out his 400,000 troops that were in Kiev, So, and then we blow it up with Boris Johnson, and the war's back on, and here we go. We get to depleting those old bombs again, so we can make new bombs, and I hate that cycle so much. But
So back to my original question.
yeah,
The direction that Trump would have to take into his cabinet administration. I mean, what does the next 2 years look like to you that you would like to see? I said that I think if they're smart, they'll handle immigration first and peace abroad. These things are universally accepted. I think it's like 75 to 80% of Americans agree that the border needs to be strengthened and immigration needs to be handled and overhauled. And I think it's like 85% of Americans agree that we need to stop the wars abroad. Yeah. So this is like universal win, right? If they want to come back in 2 years, because the Republican Party is in a very prime place where you have the House, the Senate, and the executive. you have no excuse for the next 2 years. For the next 2
It
years,
better
if
be
there
perfect
is
by the 4th of July, baby.
if there is something you want to do,
If it's not, Democrats yell at him.
you got it. Yeah, and that's what I was telling my friends was like, I was telling my liberal friends, because some of them are legitimately scared, and I was like, listen, this is a win-win scenario for you guys. Either they are everything you fear, and in the next 2 years, because they have the ability to, they make that known.
Well, I've already begun to frustrate my Trump friends because I'm already calling it out and trying to hold them in check.
Or they're not, and they make fundamental shifts in the fabric of American reality that creates more prosperity, not just for your life, but for everyone's life. Yeah. So it's a win-win. Either he is the man you say he is, and that truth will come to light, or he's not, and your life will get better for it.
Yeah, well, and if they're not, if they do a bad job, we're going to vote them out in 2 years. So,
how many people do you think are moving to Canada?
I don't think that many.
Reality.
Well, and right now, it's not the best time of year to go because it's cold. So I wouldn't go to Canada right now. But I don't know. To me, it's that doesn't seem like a much better situation up there.
That's the shit that angers me the most, if I can be honest with you. The people that want to flee.
Yeah, Casey Musgraves or whatever had her little comment. She was going to a show in Canada, and I don't know. It's like, come on. Like,
then you weren't a real patriot. You weren't real for it. I was here during Biden. I was here during Trump. I'm not leaving the U.S. No, there's nowhere else I would rather live than here.
If Kamala won, I'd be like, that's my president.
That's my president.
There we go.
Biden was my president for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And by the way, can I be honest with you?
Was he or was he there? We're not sure.
Oh, Jesus Christ. That's actually a good point.
So that's what's interesting about that book by Bob Woodward is you can start telling, they're like, starts having these events and all the donors.
You're talking about Biden's cognitive ability because of his age.
Exactly.
When you say events,
well, he was doing these campaign events, fundraiser type deals, like kind of like smaller private deals. There was one they did where there were like 20, 30 people there, and apparently he just would. I don't know if they didn't give him the right medicine or what. That's certainly how it felt on that debate night. Like they gave him the wrong meds on purpose so they could get him out.
I just don't know if there's a concoction strong enough to. That debate, can I be honest with you? Both the presidential debates were just brutal for me. Yeah. The vice presidential debate was actually the best one.
Agreed.
And I don't know if that's because they're the VPs, it's less confrontational, but it kind of reminded me like a return to form of like, hey, listen, we agree on 50% of things. We might not see eye to eye on 25% of things, and we might disagree on 25% of things, but we do agree in the direction we want to take this country. We just disagree on the path we're going to take. Yeah. And the vice presidential debate kind of reminded me like, oh, that's right. Like, we're Americans. We just want prosperity for everybody. We're tackling it from different ways. The presidential elections, on the other hand, I love politics. Like, I don't really watch football. I don't really watch baseball. I really don't give a shit about these things. I love fighting. But I watch politics the way someone watches a Chiefs game, right? And even I was cringing at these debates. I was like, dude, this is fucking brutal. Yeah. I turned off the Biden-Trump one. When they started talking about golf strokes, I was like, I'm done. There's something I could do better with my time. This is stupid.
I could not stop watching for the sake that I just couldn't believe the way that they trotted Biden out.
Oh, it was like watching a car crash. And they're just like...
And, I just don't understand with that family and what's going on. The way they keep trotting him out on the beach. And,
well, remember what we said earlier about like having our leader be an ego guy? Yeah. I think that's what it is. I think Biden has an ego.
Definitely. I mean, again, he
wants to be president.
Yeah, you have to have an ego to be president, right? Yeah. And
I don't know if power hungry is the right term, but
just feeling important. That you're a Churchill
of 44 right? people that will be
in the annals secret of compartment in the Resolute desk, right?
Did you hear the I don't know how much this carries weight, but there's a growing conspiracy whatever theory that they enact the 25th Amendment in the next 2 months and get Kamala Harris in the office.
I did hear that.
But I don't know if the Democratic Party pulls you still have like a female president that you can like, you still have the card of like the first female president in an election in the future. And I don't think they would waste that card on enacting the 25th. Especially because they lost the House and the Senate. So even if they did something like that, you'd have a lame duck president and you'd still have...
for them to do that, I think Biden almost has to really...
He's got to die. He's got to die.
Or be right there where he
or be
can't
close
walk.
to it. Like be like sent to the
drugs don't work anymore.
Like in a coma. Some sort of state where he is not cognitively aware and can no longer function as the leader of the free world. Which some would argue is the current situation.
I don't think it's been him. I think it's been Tony Blinken, John Feiner, Lloyd Austin. It's been his cabinet.
But isn't that... devil's advocate, isn't that always the case? When you vote for a president, you're not voting for an individual to run the country. You're voting for a direction and the administration that they will appoint. I mean, that's what I did for... I'm not voting for Trump. I'm voting for Vivek. I'm voting for Elon. I'm voting for Tulsi. I'm voting for RFK Jr. Right. I'm voting for J.D. Vance. This is what I'm voting for.
mean, that's where yeah. So again, going to Tony Blinken, he was one of Biden's campaign officials in 2020 election. And
Blinken is Secretary of State right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if a lot of people didn't catch this, and I see if I get this right, but so if I mess it up, you have to go find it. But in 2020, you remember the Russia. Russia gave Hunter Biden laptop, all that.
You're talking
deal,
about the
right?
dossier, the Steele dossier, and everything.
Hunter Biden laptop. Well, I mean, just the whole deal, right? There was just one thing after that for
From
4 years.
2016
They were
to 2020.
determined that it was Russia that was involved, right?
Yeah.
Well, Tony Blinken.
51 CIA agents said this had the hallmarks of Russian disinformation.
Yeah, Tony Blinken was the one that called over to the CIA and said, "Hey, we need you to write up a document to make. We have a debate coming up," and that's how they kind of squashed They're like, "Oh, the Hunter Biden laptop story is misinformation." That was the letter that the CIA wrote as ordered by Tony Blinken or asked for by Tony Blinken. And so, again, it's just like, how is that not just blatant election interference? Because a lot of people said that they would have voted differently based on that information had it come out.
You know what irritates me the most when they're talking about, like, you know, stolen election in 2020? I fundamentally don't think that there was fraud in the sense of, like, a calculated effort by a small number of people to, like, you know, ballot harvest and push votes in and, like, choose dead people and all these things. I don't think that's what it is. I don't think that's what it needs to be. I think you see that the Hunter Biden story and the laptop, had that been just out in the open and not sequestered to a conspiracy theory,
Sure.
that could have been enough to shift 2020.
Absolutely.
So, like, when people say, like, there's no such thing as election fraud, there's been...
I say there's never not zero.
There's never not zero. There's never not zero, and it's hard to depict because you see in 2020, when there's censorship, when there's clearly a perspective shift that's allowed and not allowed, versus 2024, you have a depressed vote in the Democratic Party by 8 million votes. Yeah. Joseph Biden got more votes than anyone ever in U.S. history for the president of the United States by, like, millions.
Are you referring to that
millions.
chart, that chart that's been floated around?
No, I'm talking about the actual numbers. He got 81 million votes, which is far more than any politician ever. Donald Trump I think, is going to hit 75 million, and he has the most that any Republican has ever won at 75 million.
So I feel like
6 million votes is an astronomically high number. We have, 350 million population in America? How many can actually vote? 200 million? You're talking about, almost 100%, voter turnout rate.
I think two things. One,
by the way, a lot of numbers I just threw out.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that fucking shit is real. So
I think the first thing
don't hold me to it.
The first thing I think I would say is that in 2020, everyone was cooped up at home, right? Everything was mail-in. Your ballot was sent to everybody, right? For the most part, if I recall.
Yeah.
So I do think you
But
probably had.
they did that this year as well. Did you not get a mail-in ballot? I did. You could have early voted. When I went in to vote, there was no line because a lot of people had already voted.
Had already sent it in. And what was the other point I was going to make to that is 2020. I can't remember exactly what you said there about threw off all those numbers.
Are you one of the guys that thinks it should only be one day? Because
I think it should be a national holiday.
I think it should be a national holiday, but I don't think it should be only one day. I actually like a voting week, but I do believe that you need to show proof of ID.
Yeah, well,
and no one has provided me an adequate response that tells me otherwise.
Yeah, that was one of RFK's thing. I know he talked about, and he had reached out to Al Sharpton and some of these left leaders that had been historically against a voter ID, and talking about how to get everyone just a government issue ID, and not necessarily
subsidize it.
Yeah, basically, it's not.
Would you be fine with that? Would you be fine with $10 million a year allocated to making sure that every U.S. citizen has an ID?
That sounds acceptable.
I was having an argument with a friend of mine, Steve Berger, and basically we were talking about voter ID, and his main argument, which I think actually has some water, was well, what do you do for the people that can't afford it? Yeah. Where that $15, $20 fee could be the difference between getting gas in their tank. Sure. And I was like, hey, you know what? I actually agree with you. And one of the things that Republicans are really bad at is they'll make mandates, but they won't facilitate them. So they'll make you keep the children, but they won't give you any sort of tax credits or safety nets to help you raise the children, right? So I was like, I'm with you actually. If you wanted to pass 1 day of voting, mail-in, paper ballots only, and you have to show voter ID, then you need to do a national holiday where no one has to work on that day so that everyone can go out and vote. You have to spend federal funds to make sure that every voting place is well-staffed and ready to take in that influx. Sure. And if you're going to do voter ID, then you need to be the one who subsidizes everybody's ID. And if you did all those three things,
I don't know what the numbers would be, but yeah, I'd like to see.
How could it be that much?
I can't imagine, but
you have an election every 4 years. I'm talking about the federal election, the state election. And by the way, I would even be fine with and this is me, the lesser government guy. I would be fine if the federal government got involved and passed legislation for state minimums. I'm not saying that you're running the election laws in a state, because I do believe that the states know how to govern themselves best. But if you said, hey, we're not going to have a Pennsylvania 2020 ever again. This is the absolute minimum criteria for running your election. If you don't want voter ID, okay, but you have to have 1 week of voting, not extended voting. You have to have the voting places open till 6 p.m. No ifs, ands, or buts. No 1:30 close because of influx. I'd be fine with something like that. But one of the things that I hope happens from this next Trump presidency is a transparency into the voting process. It's a win-win. Either we look into it and there's no fraud and you guys were right.
Yeah, I thought we were facing two different directions. We were either going to go towards more censorship or more transparency. And having Elon having a very pro crypto, I mean, the way crypto's popped here the last few days is pretty telling to what they think that Trump's stance is on it.
Well, he said that he's very for it.
Yeah, and so to use the blockchain to count every vote, that was something that Kennedy also promoted, was using a blockchain where you can every vote is counted for, and there's it eliminates. So I'm hoping that what we're moving towards, and again, this is my hope, and it's cautious because I don't like some of the people that are still around Trump, that we're moving towards something where there will be more transparency. We've been in this fog since JFK was assassinated, in my opinion, and we haven't ever recovered it. Absolutely.
JFK was the first one that got killed because he was fighting it.
Well, for sure. And but the American people at that point, and with the rise of media at that time, it feels like it just really just ramped itself up to this whole other deal. And I really hope that we can move ourselves towards more transparency, where the American people. I just feel like there's no trust in media. I feel like it seems like half the country doesn't trust the other half, and so we just have to find a way back to each other. And it's just tough because I talked to a guy yesterday, and
you don't think this election did anything to remedy that, though, slightly?
It definitely did to some degree, but and I don't know how much. It's tough to really say.
It's anecdotal. I agree.
It is. I just need to see. I'm trying to. I try to behave as well. I'm trying not to. I don't want to go dunk around on liberal friends. I remember when. Trump won in 2020. That
You mean in 2016
or 20,
2020? No, you're right.
2016.
2016.
Sorry. Yeah, when in 2016, it's just the vitriol, the social media. Everybody's so channelized now, and I sat here and I felt in my mind. I'm halfway through. I've been reading 1984, which my friend recommended. Yeah, I've never read it before, which I feel like I've been living it, especially the last 4 years. And as I read this book, it's very interesting in some of the correlations.
Have you ever read 1776?
I've not.
I have a copy. I'll give it to you.
That sounds great. It's just been interesting, going through 1984, and you kind of see some of these correlations to today, the censorship, all the propaganda, all the double think, and throwing something down the hole when you memory hole it, right? They say all these things we don't talk about memory holding, Trump's assassination. No one talks about it. No one could Google it.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and that's kind of what this guy's job is in the book. And for those that haven't read it, his job is like take, old propaganda and rewrite it and then throw the old stuff into what's called, basically a memory hole. And off it goes, and and they just are constantly editing and updating history.
Do you think this election will have no sort of... What do you think will be the outcome of this election on the American populace at large? Do you think we will come together? Do you think we'll continue to segregate each other?
I mean, it's gonna be interesting, man. These tariffs, I think they could cost some people some money. I think it's I think the tariffs make things more expensive, at least initially. Because companies aren't just gonna move back. There are these like coils that Tesla made.
Can I say something that might shock you?
Sure.
The Biden administration made 3 times the tariff revenue than the Trump administration made, because the Trump administration took time to install these tariffs, and the Biden administration has not revoked any of them.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the reason.
So we've been having tariffs already. Yeah. So when people say like tariffs don't work and all these other things,
I think when people get nervous about a blanket, that's the issue.
Blanket anything doesn't work.
Yeah,
and I think that's also propaganda that's used when Donald Trump says like, "I love tariffs. It's a great word." It's because he can't extrapolate himself properly in a short form.
Yeah, he speaks in short form thought.
Yes, so it's like I don't think he wants to do blanket form anything. I also very well could be wrong. time will tell. But based on his history, it's not his nature.
He gave up power today. He said he's sending the Department of Education money to the states.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a guy that's not more control. I
Less
want less control, which I don't know. I guess we'll see how it plays out. Here in Missouri, they're notoriously known as paying their teachers the worst, which I don't know who votes for that. So you guys here in Missouri need to figure who's voting against that and help teachers out, I think.
Education is an onion.
Yeah.
Education is an onion. Between the unions, between administration, between funding, like, I wish I could sit here and tell you that, like, just throwing more money at the problem will be the solve, but it's not. Yeah. There needs to be education is broken on so many levels, from the curriculum to, how we support children, to how we fund education, and specifically whether the money goes to, like, sports and media equipment versus, like, the teacher's salary or new equipment. I will say that some of the high schools I've seen and, like, the trajectory they're going is in the right path, but how much of that was, like, the infrastructure package? How much of that is changing sentiment in America? I think there are certain things that we would all universally agree on. I just think there are 50 shades of gray, and there's sometimes not an easy answer to some of these complex questions. Like, okay, education's broken, the criminal justice system, isolationist versus localism. My thing was, the reason I voted for Trump more than anything was change. I felt like Kamala would have been more of the same.
I mean,
and I don't know if that change is going to be good or bad.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm like, take a fucking chance.
I do. That's it. I feel like there was a chance for the Trump voters that, again, just based on his coalition around him versus who Kamala was, which were just the same people. And, to change nothing is just not, that's not what the people wanted. They wanted change. When you said you were going to change nothing, then that tells you you were exactly right, that she's just going to continue on the path that they were on.
What does day 2 feel like for you? So not election night, but the day after, because I know that you and I were talking and we were, like, both up watching Pennsylvania, seeing how it would swing.
Yeah, I woke up at like 2 a.m. and I was like, I'll check it. And then they announced that Trump had won. And, if you've gone back to 2016 and you told me I was going to feel relieved that Donald Trump was the president, that I wouldn't have believed you. But there was an odd sense of relief. But again, it's very cautious, and I just don't know that. I just want to see what Trump does. I guess he's in, and we're gonna let it ride.
I will say
he gets there.
I will say for myself, I didn't realize how much this election meant to me until after it happened.
Really?
Not that I think Trump is going to be the savior or anything. The way I looked at this election was like, we have chosen step 1 of change, and that just made me feel lighter. Yeah. Like, oh my gosh, we are open to the possibility of a different path. Do I think that it ends with Trump? No. This is like, literally, if it took 60 years to break, it's going to take at least 30 years to fix. I do believe that. And when I look at the bullpen of the Republican Party, when I look at the bullpen of, like, independent conservative thought, dude, when you look at the people that are in that, you can't feel nothing but hopeful. Because in 4 years, Trump is done. He's out. And then you have this slew of hyper-intelligent, critical thinking people from both sides of the aisle that have kind of coalesced into a singular thought. I'm curious to see what RFK Jr. does in 4 years, whether he takes another independent run, whether he goes back to the Democratic Party, which will have to shift slightly to the center.
I don't think he can be invited back over there. I think they hate him.
I think that the Democratic Party has the possibility to do what the Republican Party has done in the last 8 years, and that's shift. And that the Republican Party has gone from, like, the evangelical, conservative Christian Bible thumpers to critical thinkers, science believers and skeptics, and nuanced thought. I can tell you that the conversations I have with independents and conservatives are so much more intellectually stimulating than the conversations I have with liberals. It is becoming increasingly difficult to talk to people in the liberal frame because their conversations and their arguments have become so shallow and so propagated. Where the conversations I have with conservatives are more along the lines of, like, I would do it this way because of this reason. I think that I can understand why they're taking this path, but I would argue this other path. Where the liberal thought process is like doom and gloom, and I'm just like, really? This is where we're going to end with this? Like, you think this is the end?
That's where the problem with the DNC ad was. It was, end of democracy if he wins. And then we got there, and now here we
Is
are saying
democracy over?
we're doing peaceful transfer of power. So it's like, guys,
To Hitler
like,
and
yeah.
democracy ending.
I know you can't call someone Hitler and then hand power to Hitler if you don't actually believe he's Hitler. You know, come on, like
How
how
could
are we
you?
going to know when an actual fascist shows up? You know, and I don't think anybody will be able to listen to it now.
Words have meaning.
Words do have meaning, and they've been eroded. You know?
It's kind of the boy who cried wolf, but like on the Democratic Party, you've said for so long that this guy was such an existential threat, and yet he's here. And by the way, winning the popular vote. Now I know that all the votes have not been tallied, but I was looking at it today, and the majority of the states with like a high population turnout, even if you add like another 7 million votes in California to Kamala, you're gonna have to add another 4 million to Trump. He'll still win the popular vote, albeit narrowly. But that's crazy to me that he wins the Electoral College and the popular vote and the House and the Senate. This is the red wave of the midterm.
Yeah, and again, I hope they do good with it, because if they don't, I'm going to be yelling at the GOP on social media too.
Can I be honest with you? I'm scared because, not scared. Scared's not the right way to describe it, but because they have the opportunity to finally do all the things that people have been bitching about for the last, my entire adulthood, roughly 12 years of like, the government can't do anything. There's always this gridlock, this, that, or the other. Well, now you have an opportunity where the things can get done. But my fear is, what if they don't? What if the next 2 years you have like 3 or 4 rogue Republicans that will vote against the grain and join the Democrats on like, stopping certain legislation, and that there still is gridlock even with majorities? Then the reason why I'm afraid of that so much is then the system's not working. Then there is no change, and there is no
you
hope.
yourself said it was the popular vote's going to come and be a lot closer than we initially thought. So,
Yeah, midterm could remedy that.
I mean,
But then the Democrats have control of the House and the Senate. Let's just say, argument's sake, right? The next 2 years, more of the same, nothing changes. Midterms come around, blue wave. Democrats have House and Senate. Well, then it's still a lame duck presidency. If they couldn't do it before, they're not going to do it
and
after
that's
that.
again, anything he's going to get done is going to happen here in the next
2 years.
2 years.
And if it's good, they'll have another 2 years to show
if
that.
it's not, then we're going to vote them out.
Do you think there's any consolation to this being his last term and knowing that he doesn't have to worry about re-election? Do you think that's going to do anything in terms of the second administration versus the first?
I hope it allows him to do some of the things that he promised to the first time. Release the JFK stuff. Like, well, I don't have to run in futures, so help get Ross Albright out of jail. And there's things he just needs to do that I hope he follows through on. And
I was unpleasantly surprised that he didn't pardon Julian Assange the first time.
If you want me to believe that he's gonna go for it, if he pardons Snowden, I'll be like, oh boy, because that Snowden made people mad. I mean,
I don't think he'll do that.
But I think he should.
Reasons.
That's my opinion.
I could make the argument that not doing it is still the proper way, but to be honest with you, none of those things matter to me as much as peace abroad and fiscal sanity with our budget. Because all of the things that we've discussed in the last hour and 20 minutes is peanuts if we don't have some sort of fiscal responsibility, some sort of comprehensive reality check with the American people and say, hey, we are $36 trillion in debt. And unless we have an AI revolution that is comparable, if not better, than the Industrial Revolution in terms of GDP growth and prosperity to our country, to where we essentially grow ourselves out of this quagmire of debt, we're fucked.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, if we can get this country healthier, where we're not spending $4 trillion, all right, well, now we're down to 31 or 30, 32. Where can we chunk away at this? And
yes, but no, because the current budget still stands at a $1.6 trillion deficit, and now you're talking about $1 trillion and just servicing the debt. By the way, when we say servicing, that's the interest rate on the debt, and a lot of that.
So I think now every American's like 160,000 in debt.
No,
I think when I was in high school, it was like
29,000.
29,000. It was like 30,000.
I think it's over 200,000 now because you have to refinance.
Okay, wow.
In the next year, you have to refinance under the new rates, and the difference between 4%.
I know it was a lot higher.
The difference between 4% and 1% on $34 trillion of debt is monumental. Actually, 34 trillion is an exaggeration. We're talking about like 16 or 17 trillion. Still.
Yeah.
In our lifetime, there was a moment where we had a surplus. Does that strike you as crazy? George W. Bush, in his first term, was talking about how he was going to do tax cuts because the government of America, our coffers, were actually full of money.
I do not know.
24 years later,
Yeah.
$36 trillion.
Well, that's war after war will do that, you know.
Not just war after war, man. Special interest after special interest,
That's
earmark
true.
after earmark,
Man,
omnibus after omnibus.
all the lobbying, man, it concerns me. As I've learned more about it, I'm like, man, we just have lost control of
I think lobbying, as like the dictionary definition, is just basically like someone to speak on the interest
there's
of.
it has its role. It's just it seems like it's gotten out of hand. You know, we've talked about
Citizens
Citizens
United.
United last time. Yeah, Citizens United, all those private groups. That's where I get frustrated. I'm like, come on, we've got to put caps on this.
I have no problem. The way you and I met was that we both funded an RFK Jr. Dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
We got there, we got to meet him and all these other things. That's how you and I actually met. I have no problem with people wanting to put money into the coffers of the candidate that best represents their interests.
Right.
As long as we all agree there's one person, one vote, in that no matter how much money you have, you can only give a certain cap to an individual. And for me and you, that cap exists.
Right.
But
Bill
for
Gates,
a super PAC,
$50 million. That's the stuff. Exactly. The super PACs are the stuff I don't like, and all this.
well, that's what we mean by Citizens United. We mean super PACs.
Exactly, and that's I think really has got to go away to some degree.
It has to.
So
The fact
that's
that
something I hope Trump can
Kamala
get rid of.
Harris, they made $1 billion
That was crazy.
in campaign contributions. Here's the craziest part. They're $30 million in debt.
I think 20.
Sorry. How do you spend $1 billion on a campaign in 3 months
Celebrity
and
endorsements,
lose?
Instagram. I don't know.
No, celebrity endorsements, which
Guess that's it.
I think that should be illegal. You should not be able to pay someone to endorse you, because that is by definition propaganda.
Yeah.
Like,
Which I think most of the people that they paid were probably going to vote for Kamala anyway. But you know, it's like when people Taylor Swift came out to endorse Kamala. I'm
That's a
like,
good
well, all the
point.
Swifties were going to vote for
that's
her
a
anyway.
fucking
You
good
know,
point.
what
Well,
are
then
we
why
doing
get
with
paid? Why get paid? If you're going to support them, if that's your person, listen,
this? Yeah.
Elon Musk didn't get paid by Donald Trump. He paid Donald Trump's
probably-
super PAC.
It's probably. I say they get paid because they can. Because of the super PACs, they move the money
So
because
then
they can.
then it's the ineptitude and the ignorance of the Democratic Party that they would pay people that are quote unquote supporting them.
Oh, I mean, that was my whole DNC post where I called it, back in August that I thought Kamala would lose because of all the malarkey the DNC has done this year, in this election. Suing multiple candidates to stay off or on ballots, based on where it's advantageous for
First
them.
of all, suing them to not be on the ballot, then suing them to keep them on the ballot.
Yeah.
Make that make sense.
I know. Like, come on, guys.
The
Like,
weaponization of government, has it ever been this bad in your lifetime? You're slightly older
I mean,
than I am.
if it
slightly.
has, I probably just didn't notice. COVID woke me up when that happened. Everyone's locked home. I start reading books, and you start thinking, "Wait, what's happened?" And the whole time, of course, trying to figure out what happened. And you can read the real Anthony Fauci and the Wuhan cover-up, and you'll find information that that we were living in a completely different world that we thought. And again, that's one of those books. I think I've sent out over 20 copies of that Fauci book to people, and no one's called me to be like, "He's wrong." So I highly recommend that one. It's a dark book, and I only say take a chapter maybe a week because it's heavy.
After we had that conversation, I had one of my high school wrestlers that listened to the podcast episode, and I
Yeah.
actually sent him the book.
Oh man, he's
I gotta ask him if he's finished it.
it's a tough one, and you've got to have a different mentality, I think, to want to actively read that one. But right now, it's probably a lot of people are just seem to move past that at this point.
Do you
But
think
he gets $15 million. Fauci gets $15 million a year for protection and security services.
you're kidding?
Why would he
me.
need that? Isn't he
Federally?
American? Yeah. Why would he need that? Didn't he help everybody?
Gotta trust the science.
I guess I don't know. It's certainly interesting. I
didn't know that. I didn't know that he gets 15 million. First of all, that's inefficient. I got a bunch of guys in the inner city that'll protect you for a lot less, brother.
Yeah. Government efficiency, right? So we got to bring an Elon there. Hopefully, fix some. of that stuff.
I got guys that'll do it for like $20 an hour.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you they're harder.
That's probably true. That's probably true.
Anyway, I did want to ask you, because I
Yeah.
know we're kind of stressed on time, but there were a couple more questions I wanted to kind of
Yeah.
like spitfire
No, we're
to
good.
you that I'm interested in as well. What do you think the mainstream media, CNBC, MSNBC, CNN, what do you think they're going to learn, if anything, from this election?
I mean, from the coverage I've watched so far, nothing. Is, I mean, they're blaming minorities for.
Let me rephrase the question.
Okay.
Either them or the pharmaceutical companies, big ad, the military industrial complex that basically fund these propaganda machines.
So I guess that'll be interesting. Is that was one big RFK's big things was getting rid of big pharma advertising in the U.S. I can remember that time, and it was great.
It's just us and New Zealand, the only two countries in the world that allow it.
Yeah. And so, I think if you get that, I mean, that's their air cover, right? I don't know if you ever got it. I've gotten the Instagram ad for Northrop Grumman's like submarine. I'm like, I can't buy a submarine from Northrop Grumman.
Well, now with that attitude, now you got to start picking yourself up from the bootstraps a little harder, brother.
I guess so, but I'm going to have to get like a Lyft or start Uber driving.
I'm just trying to buy a boat.
But it's just like, now, I'm like, why would I be seeing a Northrop Grumman ad on my Instagram? And to me, it's like, oh, well, that's air cover. That's clearly bribery by,
money laundering, but for a specific purpose.
For the salaries of the media,
I can't give you money, but I can pay you for services rendered.
Yeah. So to me, it's, I don't know, the spending will be interesting.
Do you think their power will increase or decrease or stay the same?
I think it's already decreased substantially. And, where their constituents are the baby boomers. That's who, like my parents will watch evening news, and, I do too, because I like to see what they're trying to make me think is how I look at it.
I try.
Yeah.
It's becoming increasingly difficult.
Yeah, I'm probably a crazy person the way I try to absorb all this at the same time.
When I decided, by the way, COVID was also my great awakening. Yeah. When I decided to read more and listen to long form discussions, it made the mainstream media approach almost like
it's obsolete.
It's just such an inferior product.
Yeah.
It's such an inferior
But they've got to
product.
pay, they've got to get those advertisers out there.
But then let me ask you this, though. I mean, because you're kind of alluding to it. I mean, if your investment is in the baby boomer generation who's more in line with the mainstream coverage. By the way, Fox News is a very conservative brand of mainstream coverage. So I'm not trying to say only liberals benefit from this. They have more options, but Fox News is the #1 rated news source in America. So it's you might have the deviations of propaganda for the liberals, but you have the kingpin of propaganda for the conservatives. So by no means I'm saying that this is isolated to red versus blue only. This is across the aisle. Both parties have this sort of propaganda team to kind of push the narratives. My question though is if by the metrics these media sources are increasingly becoming only subservient to an aging, literally dying demographic, how much longer do they exist under the current banner? Because I do think they have
it's phasing out.
But they have a purpose, right? If you listen to any of these podcasts, what are they referencing? New York Times, Washington Post, CNN. They're using them.
The starting block.
Yes, because they're not news sources the way these news sources are.
That's totally how I feel. I'm sure I mentioned on our last podcast. People listen to people in China don't listen to the Chinese news and know it's not propaganda. Same in Russia. I think our news is also propaganda in many, many cases. It's very emotional. It's very triggering. It gets people worked up. It makes you hate your neighbor. And I think ever since COVID, I think that's part of the problem is everyone just became so segregated physically, and then everyone found the channel that I think this is what makes sense to me. And so I have friends I only listen to the Daily, the New York Times, or I only listen to Tucker, or I only listen to Joe Rogan, and I'm like, you're leaving a lot of information on the table.
You can't. That's an echo chamber, even if it's a good echo chamber.
Yeah, again, you're gonna get stuck. And so to me, I genuinely, whether it's Crystal Sager, Dave Smith, I think is fantastic. Jimmy Dore, I found myself listening to Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, Brett Cooper. I go Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh. Rachel Maddow.
A lot of the names. Oh, Rachel Maddow. I was going to say. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, Rachel
Maddow. A lot
of
conservative.
There's a lot of conservative, but if there's a left-leaning person, I'll tune into a Call Her Daddy. I listen to Kamala podcast there.
Who resonates the most with you? What form of media or what podcast or what news outlet do you enjoy consuming the most?
I find myself always looking forward to. Dave Smith is probably #1. His Part of the Problem podcast, I think, is fantastic.
I also think he's an extreme intellectual disguised as a comedian.
Yeah, he is fantastic. I wish we had more people like him in politics.
Every episode he's on JRE, I bookmark. I'm like, fuck yeah.
Can't wait. I know. I turn on immediately.
My goal with this podcast is to one day get big enough to talk to him in person.
Oh man.
That would...
I'll
invite you. If that ever happens, we can do a panel.
I would love to do that.
We can both gush.
I would. I'd swoon a little bit. He seems like a cool dude who just knows his stuff, and he's someone who's
also extremely rational.
Yeah, and he just
He rarely says things that I don't agree with.
yeah, and again, he and I don't totally agree on everything. He became not a Kennedy guy, and that's okay. Again, I don't care. We don't have to align
I don't think
on
he's not a
everything.
Kennedy guy.
Yeah,
I think
I heard he's bringing him back on as well.
his position on Israel
Right.
was so that was like his breaking point. But then the
Right.
second RFK Jr. endorses President Trump, suddenly,
Yeah,
which
he comes around on him.
by the way, I said this before and I'll say it again. There's no candidate that differs on their position on Israel.
Yeah.
Take that for whatever it's worth, which I would love to, at one point in time, dissect and understand why.
Well, I haven't finished the book. Maybe I can come back and do that. I'll try and finish this Israel Lobby book by John Mearsheimer, and we can talk about it. But that's, to me, you see some of these awful images coming out of that area, and I don't think all Jewish people are doing. This is not their fault. This is happening, right? So to me, these are separate issues. I have my Jewish friends I love, and I'm not like, oh, I can't believe you guys are letting this happen. They're like, they have no control. Like we have no control of our military.
I guess the only reason I bring it up is there's very rare things where like everyone seems to be in consensus, and this is one.
Well,
I'm trying to pinpoint why.
And I haven't watched this documentary, but I've heard about it, and I want to go watch it. I think it's called The Savage Peace, and it's supposed to be basically how after World War II, the Allies basically did a mass extermination of the German people. Like 6 million Germans were, women and children were just eradicated. And it's one of those. I pulled it up.
Post World War II.
Post World War II, I'm 99% sure it's called The Savage Peace. It's a documentary. I
Was
pulled
this
up on YouTube, and I was like,
after Hitler committed suicide, and
yeah, this is all post-war.
Wow,
yeah,
I didn't
it's
know that.
very dark. I mean, again,
with what, blockades, actual like bombings.
I think there was probably some blockades and starvation. I think then they weren't letting some stuff into some places. But yeah, if I remember, whoever summarized it is that they got rid of and exterminated about 6 million ethnic Germans after World War II. The war was over.
Jesus.
And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people knew that. And I pulled up the documentary, and I was like, not today. I can only take in so much negative and just dark information, and I just didn't have the bandwidth that day. But maybe before I come back, that'll be the other one I have to check out. Because again, I don't think it's all IDF soldiers. There's a handful of bad actors there. There's a handful of bad actors here in the U.S. There's a handful of bad actors in every country. But we've got to, reel this in, because if Israel's going to maintain its status in the world, they've got to reclaim some sort of
dominance of some kind.
Yeah, and just I don't know, clairvoyance. I don't know. I don't know if they just need to get some of these war hawks out of their office. Maybe that's the issue. It's the guys they currently have in charge, kind of like our situation. We have this Jake Sullivan and Victoria Nuland, all these people that I'm not a fan of here, and I don't know. Maybe they just need new leadership over there as well. To me, the United States has to take responsibility for its actions, and I don't see. I just don't agree when people say the U.S. is totally off the hook on everything. We send money to places, and we have a responsibility of what happens to that money. I mean, they say 30 to 40% of the money in Ukraine, and we don't even know where it's gone to.
Yeah,
that's crazy. That's crazy.
Well, there's no open source accounting. We just shift the money over to them, and then however they spend it, they choose. Rand Paul wanted to just do an investigation on it, just see where the money was spent and how, and how much of that money can no longer be accounted for.
Yeah.
And that got shot down.
Of course
we didn't even want to check where the money was spent. How dare you? How dare you not trust them that they're spending this $100 billion accordingly?
Yeah, and so to me, I'm just trying to promote less death in the world and less cancer. Those are my two big things. I don't know that Kennedy's right on all the food stuff. I like to think he's right on some of it, and anyone that's defending red dye, I'm like, that's petroleum. It's compressed petroleum. We don't need red dye. Let's get some of these chemicals out of the food. Let's see if we can get ourselves a little healthier, and let's see if we can stop some of this military-industrial complex from happening. That's really what I voted on personally. I just wanted less death and less cancer. And, if women want to do what they want, I've supported that too.
Like I said earlier, I don't think that this next, 2 years or 4 years is going to be like this monumental shift in reality where all of our problems are solved.
Absolutely not.
But I do have the optimism of looking at it as like step one in the right direction.
I think that's a fair way to look at it. It's I think a reset of the board, and I hope that, again, Trump can follow through on some of these things that he says he wants to do.
Let me end this with this podcast with one more question,
Okay.
And that is, where do you align now?
Man, I still think I'm partyless. I sit here and I'm already, like I said, I'm frustrating Trump friends because I'm calling out some of the people that he's starting to whisper to, And I just want good people in office. And if based on my algorithm and my thoughts, if I don't think it's a good person, I'm going to try to call it out. And that's where I think I stand. If I think, and it'd be the same thing. If I were in office and I made a mistake, I would want my friends and my constituents to hold me accountable. That's what politics is about, is doing what your constituents think is best. And when you don't, we move on to someone else.
Would you ever run for any sort of elected office?
Oh, man.
Mayor, alderman.
I'm not gonna lie that I don't consider it, but yeah, maybe something local would be interesting to do. Get involved and learn a little bit about it. I don't think I'm totally prepared yet. I spend a lot of time reading. I've been going through like Thomas Paine, Henry David Thoreau, Common Sense, stuff like that. So I'm trying to get myself where if I wanted to do that someday, maybe I could be in a position to be of value to this country or my state or my city. But I don't ever see myself running for any high office level.
It's a shame. You're one of the few guys that I would say that this country would be better served if you were. I mean, I'm not saying run for president. I'm saying anything
definitely
small.
not that.
Common sense, articulate, nuanced thought. I think that's what's missing in a lot of, not just federal government, but state and local as well.
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm hoping Trump can bring into some degree. And the guy has been known to change course. So yeah. I just hope he's on a good course right now. I hope his chief of staff. I secretly hope she's been kind of like Nicole Shanahan, a little bit red pilled, and to some degree, when it comes to at least the military industrial complex, is what I mean specifically there. But I don't know. I guess it'll be wait and see. I guess a few more months go by. We'll have to get together and see where we're at.
When are you in town next?
Oh, I'd probably be January, February.
Right after the inauguration.
That could be fun.
Dude, we might have a week or two of a Trump presidency.
We could go to D.C. on January 6th if you want.
Do you want to?
Maybe.
I know that there are some schools that I know in the local area that are actually going to the inauguration. If you want to go, I'm down to do. I'm down to go.
Well, that'd be January 20th. I guess the inauguration. I guess I was going to set myself up for a joke there, but to request off for work to HR just to make him nervous. But
if you want to go, dude, I'll fuck it. Let's do it.
Maybe a
weekend in DC.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on the weather. See how it's going to look in January. I won't be out there freezing cold.
I can solidify now that if you want to go to the inauguration and spend a weekend or a week, let's take the ladies out too.
That'd be fun.
Make it a trip. Have fun with it.
Yeah,
we're only in the swamp of America, embracing the freedom that it entails.
Yeah, man.
Greg Tabor,
Dude,
I appreciate
good chatting
you,
with
brother.
you.